Now let me turn to three other key issues. Just this morning, we had a great economic report showing inflation is down. Overall prices fell last month. Core inflation is the lowest it's been in 3 years. Prices are falling for cars, appliances, and airfares. Grocery prices have fallen since the start of the year. We're going to keep working to take down corporate greed to bring those prices down further. Meanwhile, Trump's calling for a 10% tariff on everything Americans buy, including food from overseas, vegetables, and other necessities. And economists tell us that that would cost the average American working family another $2,500 a year. It's a tax of $2,500 a year. Second, our efforts to secure the border, southern border, is working. After Trump killed the bipartisan effort to secure the border, Republicans and Democrats had worked on, because he thought it would benefit me and make him a loser, Republicans walked away. So I took executive action last month. As a consequence, working with Mexico, border encounters have gone down over 50%. The current level is lower today than when Trump left office. Third, for months, the United States has been working to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, to bring the hostages home, to create a path for peace and stability in the Middle East. 6 weeks ago, I laid out a detailed plan in writing. It was endorsed by the UN Security Council, the G7. That framework is now agreed on by both Israel and Hamas. So I sent my team to the region to hammer out the details. These are difficult, complex issues. There's still gaps to close, but we're making progress. The trend is positive, and I'm determined to get this deal done and bring an end to this war, which should end now. Let me conclude where I began. We're the United States of America. We are the indispensable nation. Our leadership matters. Our partnerships matter. This moment matters. We must rise to meet it. With that, I'll take your questions. I've been given a list of people to call on here. Reuters, Jeff Mason.
Mr. President, your political future has hung over the NATO summit a little bit this week. Speaker Pelosi made a point of suggesting that your decision on whether to stay in the race was still open. George Clooney and a handful of lawmakers have called on you to step aside. Reuters is reporting tonight that UAW leadership is concerned about your ability to win.
UAW just endorsed me, but go ahead.
Thank you. My question for you is, how are you incorporating these developments into your decision to stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one, the fact is that the consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. Secondly, the idea, I served in the Senate a long time. The idea that senators and congressmen running for office worry about the ticket is not unusual. And I might add, there are at least 5 presidents running or incumbent presidents who had lower numbers than I have now, later in the campaign. So there's a long way to go in this campaign. And so I'm just going to keep moving. And because, look, I got more work to do. We've got more work to finish. There's so much, we made so much progress. Think about it. Think about where we are economically relative to the rest of the world. Name me a world leader who wouldn't want to trade places with our economy. We've created over 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 1.5 million jobs. I mean, so things are moving. We got more to go. Working class people still need help. Corporate greed is still at large. Their prices, the corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. They're coming down, and so I'm optimistic about where things are going. Danny Kemp, AFP.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about your, you mixed up Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today. And you now have sort of your key allies, including the British Prime Minister, the President of France, and the German Chancellor having to step in and make excuses for you on that. And officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing by leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, here, I mean, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody suggests that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear in that conference, I know it sounds too self-serving, but other leaders, heads of state, in thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden, because Biden did the following. Look, folks, this is, well, anyway, I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time, and find me a world leader who didn't think it was. Next one, Nancy Cordes, CBS.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned other instances in history where presidents have faced a challenge, but what makes this moment in history so unique is that it is not your enemies who are calling on you to reconsider your decision to stay in the race. It's your friends, supporters, people who think you've done a great job over the past 4 years. Have you spent time thinking about what it would mean for your legacy, which you've worked decades to build, if you stay in the race, despite the concerns that voters say they have, and you lose to someone who you yourself have argued is unfit to return to the Oval Office?
Well, look, I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. As you recall, understandably, many of you and many economists thought my initial initiatives that I put forward, can't do that, it's going to cause inflation, things are going to skyrocket, the debt's going to go up. What are you hearing now from mainstream economists? 16 economic Nobel laureates said I've done a hell of a job. That under my plan so far and what's going to happen in the future if I'm reelected, that things are going to get much better. Our economy is growing. I was determined when I got elected to stop the trickle-down economic theory, that if the wealthy did very well, everybody else would do well. My dad was a well-read, decent guy. I don't remember much trickling down on his kitchen table. Middle-class people and working-class people need help. And so what happened is I decided to was able to implement as president what I believed when I was a senator. And that is that the way to build this economy is from the middle out and the bottom up. That way we grow the economy. And the wealthy still do very well. They do fine. And guess what? Find me an economist, a mainstream economist who said we haven't done well. What have we not done that isn't working right now? And so we got more to do, though. We got to finish the job. And by the way, I come from the corporate state of the world. Delaware has more corporations registered in Delaware than every other state in the nation combined. I'm not anti-corporate, but corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic, doubled. It's time things get back in order a little bit. It's time, for example, if I'm reelected, we're going to make sure that rents are kept at 5% increase of corporate rents for apartments and the like and homes are limited to 5%. We're going to make a lot of changes that I've been talking about because we're going to continue to grow this economy. And by the way, I know, remember how I got so roundly criticized for being so pro-union, not labor, union. Well, guess what? I've been the most pro-union labor president in history. Not a joke. And guess what? We had the Treasury Department do a study. When unions do better, everybody does better. Everybody does better. And we talk about how, for example, remember when we talked about getting the computer chip industry back in the United States? Used to be 40% of the industry. We invented the chip. 40% of the industry was in the United States. And former presidents decided that the best way to do it is find the cheapest labor in the world, send the product over there, and import what the product was. And so what did I do? I was told not to go over to Europe, to Asia, including Europe, but Asia. And I remember going to South Korea, convincing them to invest $20 billion in the United States to build computer chip factories. And I asked why when they finally decided to do it. And the answer was because you have the safest economy in the world and you have the best workers in the world. So the whole idea here is we've invested, there's over $50 billion in investment in computer chip manufacturing just coming into being. None of you thought that would happen. None of you thought that would happen. But it's happening. It's happening. And it's going to grow economies all through. And by the way, red states and blue states. Matter of fact, there's as much in red states as in blue states. I've made no distinction. So my generic point is that the idea that we can't continue to build and grow the economy, make it fairer. And like I said, from my standpoint, when the middle class does well, that's when the whole economy grows. The poor have a shot, the wealthy do well, but the wealthy got to start paying their taxes.
As a follow-up, sir, you mentioned that your Vice President Kamala Harris would be ready to serve on day one. Can you elaborate on that? What is it about her attributes and her accomplishments over the last 4 years that make her ready to serve on day one if necessary?
First of all, the way she's handled the issue of freedom of women's bodies to have control over their bodies. Secondly, her ability to handle almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her. Felicia Schwartz, Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. The presidency is the most straining job in the world, and it's 24/7. How can you say you'll be up for that next year, in 2 years, in 4 years, given the limits you've acknowledged that you have today?
The limits I've acknowledged I have?
There's been reporting that you've acknowledged that you need to go to bed earlier and your evening around 8.
That's not true. Look, what I said was, instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10 o'clock. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and if you looked at my schedule since I made that stupid mistake in the campaign, in the debate, I mean, my schedule has been full bore. I've done, where's Trump been? Riding around in his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look, he's done virtually nothing. And I have, I don't know how many, don't hold me to it, roughly 20 major events. Some of them with thousands of people showing up. And so I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to keep going, not stop. I just got to pace myself a little more. Pace myself. And the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling into 15 time zones a week before. Anyway, that's what it was about. That's what it was about. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time. At the very end, I'm catching hell from my wife for that. Anyway, I'm sorry. Zeke Miller, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions for you. First, on the NATO summit, President Zelensky, in your meeting with him, he pressed you to lift your limitations on the Ukrainian use of American weapons, saying that, in his public remarks afterwards, saying that Ukraine cannot win the war unless those limitations are lifted. Are you reconsidering your position on that? And then secondly, following up on Felicia's question there, leaders of your own party have said that they're not worried about that debate. They're worried about the next bad night and the bad night after that. How can you reassure the American people that you are up to the task and that there won't be more bad nights at a debate stage or somewhere else?
First thing about Zelensky asking for the ability to strike deep into Russia. We've allowed Zelensky to use American weapons in the near term, in the near or abroad, into Russia. Whether or not he should be attacked. For example, should Zelensky, he's not. If he had the capacity to strike Moscow, strike the Kremlin, would that make sense? It wouldn't. The question is, what's the best use of the weaponry he has, and the weaponry we're getting to him? I've gotten a more long-range capacity, as well as defensive capacity. And so our military is where I'm following the advice of my commander-in-chief, the chief of staff of the military, as well as the Secretary of Defense and our intelligence people. And we're making a day-to-day basis on what they should and shouldn't go, how far they should go in. That's a logical thing to do. Second question related to
Bad nights, sir. How can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or on some matter of foreign policy?
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself. And that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's gotten more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years? I created 2,000 jobs just last week. So if I slow down, I can't get the job done. That's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. But there's no indication of that yet. None. Who I got here? Merrick, Pulaski Radio.
Thank you, Mr. President. How are you?
I'm well.
The elections in the US have consequences around the world. You have pretty high standing in Europe. I just asked President Macron about you, and he said we are happy to have him as the President of the United States. But there is a concern. Many people in Poland and across Europe are worried that the former president may win the election. And there's a lot of concern that Donald Trump may weaken NATO, stop supporting Ukraine, or push Ukraine to give up territories to Russia.
They're correct.
And yourself was warning just 2 minutes ago about it. So my question is, do you think that Europe will be left on its own if Donald Trump wins the election? And what's your advice to European leaders to prepare for possible US disengagement?
Well, look, I think, how can I say this without sounding too self-serving? I'm not having any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. You can't let this guy come forward. It'd be a disaster. It'd be a disaster. I mean, I think he said in one of his rallies, don't hold me to this, recently, where NATO, I just learned about NATO or something to that effect. Foreign policy has never been his strong point. And he seems to have an affinity to people who are authoritarian. That worries, as I tell you from Poland, that worries Europe. That worries Poland. And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine. that that's going to be the end of it. And so what I can say is, I think I'm the best qualified person to do the job, to make sure that Ukraine does not fall, that Ukraine succeeds, that the European alliance stays strong. You may recall, no one was talking about Finland joining NATO. I remember talking to Putin right after we got elected in Geneva, and he was talking about what we should do. We couldn't be in Eastern Europe, et cetera. And I said, you're looking for the Finlandization of Ukraine, because you're going to get the NATOization of Finland. And about 4 weeks later, I got a call. No, that's not true. Probably 5 months later, from the president of Finland, could he come and see me? Because in my office, I invited him to the Oval Office. We sat down and talked. He said he wanted to join NATO. Could I help? And I did. It wasn't automatic. And then I got a call from the Swedes. I beg your pardon? And so Finland joined NATO. 800-mile border is a significant, and they're already allies, but they weren't part of NATO. And you heard, I think you heard, maybe I can't recall whether he said it publicly in our closed meeting, but he wouldn't mind it being repeated. He said, we decided in Finland, the people of Finland decided they had to be part of NATO. It was in our interest because of the joint ability to be together, to dissuade any attack on Finland. And the same thing with Sweden. It took a lot of selling to some folks, particularly in Turkey and other places, to agree to the expansion. But it expanded. And we're a hell of a lot stronger because of it. We're more secure because of it. And by the way, I was able to get 50 other nations, 50, to support Ukraine. 50. And we were able to bring about a coalition of Europe and Asia, Japan and South Korea. I just we talked about AUKUS, and we talked about the relationship between Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, the United States. We're making the world safer and stronger because we have to deal with the new arrangement that exists in the world. The Cold War is over. The post-war era is over. What is going to replace it? And I respectfully suggest I have a pretty good idea what that should be. I've convinced a lot of people to follow it, and we're just going to get stronger. David Sanger. Where's it?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Be nice, David.
Mr. President, the NATO declaration that was issued yesterday was very notable because it described China as a decisive enabler of the war in Ukraine for its provision of critical goods to the Russians. That's part of a broader partnership that seems to have cemented in place in the past 2 or 3 years. I think one that you were a little bit doubtful of when we asked you about it some time ago. So I'd be interested to know whether you have a strategy now of trying to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia, and whether or not in a second term you would pursue that, if you could describe that strategy to us. And along the way, could you also tell us whether you think, just to follow up on Felicia's question, that if you were in a room with Vladimir Putin again, the way you were 3 years ago, or with President Xi, that a few years from now you will be able to go negotiate with them, handle them one-on-one?
Well, the first part of the question is, we discussed and I raised in the NATO summit, and others raised, the future of China's involvement, what they're going to do. What they're doing with Russia in terms of accommodating, facilitating, they're getting access to additional, they're not supplying weapons themselves, they're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has, over 90 hours since being vice president all the way through, for real. And by the way, I handed all my notes. But my point is that she believes that China is a large enough market that they can entice any country, including European countries, to invest there in return for commitments from Europe to do A, B, C, or D, or not to do certain things. What's happened is we had a long discussion about what we cannot, we have to make clear China has to understand that if they are supplying Russia with information and capacity, along with working with North Korea and others to help Russia in armament, that they're not going to benefit economically as a consequence of that by getting the kind of investment they're looking for. And so, for example, we're in a situation where, and we've reestablished direct contact with China after that, remember the balloon, quote unquote, going down, and all of a sudden things came to an end? Well, we set up a new mechanism. There's a direct line between Xi and me, and our military has direct access to one another, and they contact one another when we have problems. The issue is that we have to make sure that she understands there's a price to pay for undercutting both the Pacific Basin as well as Europe, and as it relates to Russia and dealing with Ukraine. And so we, for example, if you want to invest in China, as you know this area really well. If you want to invest in China, you have to have a 51% Chinese owner. You have to make sure that you do by their rules. And you don't have the authority, and you have to provide all access to all the data and information you have. There was a while there, as you recall, the last administration and other administrations, where the access to that market was enticing enough to get companies to come in because they had access to over 1 billion people in a market, not 1 billion, but a lot of people in the market. And so they were doing it. But that got curtailed when we started saying we're going to play by the same rules. For example, the idea they don't abide by the international rules related to subsidizing products by the government funding. So guess what? They're not going to be able to export their electric vehicles to the United States without a significant tariff. Others are doing the same thing around the world. But it is a concern. It is a concern that you have both China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, countries that are not necessarily coordinated in the past, looking to figure out how they can have impact.
Do you have a strategy to interrupt that impact?
Yes, I do, but I'm not prepared to talk about the detail of it in public. And I think you'll see that some of our European friends are going to be curtailing their investment in Russia. In China, as long as China continues to have this indirect help to Russia in terms of being able to help their economy as well as help them in, as a consequence of that, their ability to fight in Ukraine. The other thing that we talked a lot about is that, and I raised it, and I didn't hear any. I can't swear that everyone agreed because not everyone got to talk about it, but we need a new industrial policy in the West. For example, we talked about how both the EU as well as NATO has to be able to begin to build their own munition capacity, has to be able to generate their own capacity to provide for weapons and the ability to, it came as a surprise to some of us how we had fallen behind in the West in terms of the ability to construct new material, new weaponry, new everything from vehicles to weapon systems. And so one of the things that came out of this was we're going to be meeting again with a number of my colleagues, my European colleagues, is what do we do to increase the capacity of the West, particularly in Europe and Japan, to be able to generate the kind of ability to produce their own weapon systems. Not just for themselves, but to be able to generate that. It's the same, it's what Russia's trying to figure out, that they went to China and they didn't get the weapons, but then they went to North Korea. But we're going to be in a position where the West is going to become the industrial base for it to be able to, the ability to have all the defensive weapons that we need. That was a discussion as well.
Mr. President, I'm not sure you answered on whether you would be ready to go deal with Putin and Xi 2 or 3 years from now.
I'm ready to deal with them now and 3 years from now. Look, like I said, I'm dealing with Xi right now and direct contact with him. I have no good reason to talk to Putin right now. There's not much that he is prepared to do in terms of accommodating any change in his behavior. And, but there isn't any world leader I'm not prepared to deal with. But I understand the generic point is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin's ready to change his behavior. And the idea, look, Putin's got a problem. First of all, in this war that he is supposedly have won, and by the way, I think, don't hold me to the exact number, but I think that Russia had 17.3% of Ukraine that they've conquered. Now it's 17.4. I mean, in terms of percentage of territory. They've not been very successful. They've caused horrible damage, loss of life, but they've also lost over 350,000 troops, military, killed or wounded. They have over 1 million people, particularly young people with technical capability, leaving Russia because they see no future there. They've got a problem. But what they do have control of is they are very good at controlling and running the public outcry that relates to how they use mechanisms to communicate with people. They lie like hell through the constituencies. They lie like hell about what's going on. And so the idea that we're going to be able to fundamentally change Russia in the near term is not likely. But one thing for certain, if we allow Russia to succeed in Ukraine, they're not stopping in Ukraine. I recommend, I know you know this because you've written about it, read Putin's speech after they moved in, what it was all about in Kyiv. It wasn't about just, anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway, but so I think that I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including if Putin called me and wanted to talk. Last time I talked to Putin was trying to get him to work on an arms control agreement related to nuclear weapons in space. That didn't go very far. So my point is, I'm prepared to talk to anybody, but I don't see any inclination. There is an inclination on the part of the Chinese to keep in contact with me because they're not sure where this all goes. And look what's happened in Asia. We have strengthened the Asian Pacific area more than anybody else has. We just put together with, today I brought on, I asked our NATO allies that we bring on the group from the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Australia. I already mentioned Australia. And I met twice now, I think, with the 14 leaders of the Pacific Island nations. And we've slowed down what's going on there. We've slowed down China's reach. But there's a lot of work to do. This is a moving target, and I don't take it lightly. Assam from NPR.
Thank you, Mr. President. Asma Khalid with NPR. I have two questions. Earlier, you spoke about the ceasefire plan between Israel and Hamas. We're now looking at 10 months of war, and I'm curious if there's anything that you feel personally you wish you would have done differently over the course of the war. And then secondly, if I may, I wanted to ask you about your presidential campaign. I remember covering your campaign in 2020, and there was a moment where you referred to yourself as a, quote, bridge candidacy, a transition to a younger generation of leaders. I want to understand what changed.
Two things. Let's go back to when you talked about would I have changed anything that's happening with Israel and the Palestinians and the Palestinian movement. The answer is, as you recall, from the very beginning, I went to Israel, but I also got immediate contact with al-Sisi in Egypt. I met with the King of Jordan. I met with most of the Arab leaders to try to get a consensus going as to what had to be done to deal with getting more aid and food and medicine into the Gaza Strip. And we pushed it really hard. And Israel occasionally was less than cooperative, number one. The Israeli War Cabinet, I've been dealing with Israel since Golda Meir. Some of the reporters around here come here all the time have heard me say this. The first time I met with Golda Meir, I sat across from her at her desk, and her assistant was Rabin sitting next to me. That's how far back I go. I know Israel well, and I support Israel. But this war cabinet is one of the most conservative war cabinets in the history of Israel. And there's no ultimate answer other than a two-state solution here. And so what was able to be done in terms of the plan I put together was it would be a process for a two-state solution. And we get the Arab nations to, particularly from Egypt all the way to Saudi Arabia, to be in a position where they would cooperate in the transition so that they could keep the peace in Gaza without Israeli forces staying in Gaza. The question has been from the beginning, what's the day after in Gaza? And the day after in Gaza has to be, the end of the day after has to be no occupation by Israel on the Gaza Strip, as well as the ability for us to get in and out as rapidly as you can, all that's needed there. I've been disappointed that some of the things that I've put forward have not succeeded as well, like the port we attached from Cyprus. I was hopeful that would be more successful. But that's why when I went to Israel immediately after the massacres that occurred at the hands of Hamas, the one thing I said to the Israelis, and I met with the War Cabinet and with Bibi, don't make the same mistake America made after bin Laden. There's no need to occupy anywhere. Go after the people who did the job. You may recall, I still get criticized for it, but I was totally opposed to the occupation and trying to unite Afghanistan. Once we got bin Laden, we should have moved on, because it was not no one's ever going to unite that country. I've been over every inch of that, not every inch, the entirety from the poppy fields all the way to the north. I said, don't make the same mistake we made. Don't think that's what you should be doing, is doubling down. We'll help you find the bad guys, Sinwar and company. And all this criticism about I wouldn't provide when the weapons they needed. I'm not providing them 2,000-pound bombs. They cannot be used in Gaza or any populated area without causing great human tragedy and damage. But remember what happened when you had the attack on Israel with rockets and ballistic missiles. I was able to unite the Arab nations as well as Europe, and nothing happened. Nothing got hurt. It sent an incredible lesson to what was going on from the Middle East. So there's a lot of things, in retrospect, I wish I had been able to convince the Israelis to do. But the bottom line is we have a chance now. It's time to end this war. Doesn't mean walk away from going after Sinwar and Hamas. And if you notice, you know better than most, there is a growing dissatisfaction in on the West Bank from the Palestinians about Hamas. Hamas is not popular now. And so there's a lot of moving parts. I just have to keep moving to make sure that we get as much done as we can toward a ceasefire, and get those. And by the way, look at the numbers in Israel. I mean, my numbers are better in Israel than they are here. But then again, they're better than a lot of other people here too. But anyway.
Bridge candidacy in 2020, you referred to yourself as being a bridge candidate for a younger, fresher generation of Democratic leaders, and I wanted to know what changed.
What changed was the gravity of the situation I inherited in terms of the economy, our foreign policy, and domestic division. And I think, I won't put words in anybody's mouth, most presidential historians give me credit for having accomplished more than most any president since Johnson and maybe before that to get major pieces of legislation passed. And what I realized was my long time in the Senate had equipped me to have the wisdom to know how to deal with the Congress to get things done. We got more major legislation passed that no one thought would happen. And I want to finish it, to get that finished. If tomorrow, if we had a circumstance where there was a lineup and I hadn't inherited what I did and we just moved things along, anyway, it's going to change.
Last question.
Haley Bull, Scripps. Or no, Josh Weingrove, I'm sorry, was the next one. I'll do 2 more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Many of your colleagues, Democrats on the Hill, are watching tonight as they assess what they want to say about your candidacy. I'm wondering how you're thinking of this right now. It seems like your answer is clear, but they're watching how things go tonight, tomorrow in Michigan, next week in Texas and Nevada. Are you thinking that way about how the next week or 2 goes would inform your...
Am I using that way, you say?
Are you thinking that way about how the next 2 weeks go? Will that affect your decision, or are you fully determined on running in November as the party's nominee?
I'm determined on running, but I think it's important that I allay fears by let them see me out there. Let me see them out, for the longest time it was, Biden's not prepared to sit with us unscripted. Biden's not prepared to, anyway. And so what I'm doing is, and I've been doing, I think we've done over 20 major events from Wisconsin to North Carolina to demonstrate that I'm going out in the areas where we think we can win, where we can persuade people to move our way, or people are already there. And here, look, the other thing is, we have the most extensive campaign organization of anybody's had in a long, long time. We have well over 1,000 volunteers knocking on doors, making phone calls, making tens of thousands of phone calls. We have headquarters, I forget exactly how many, I want to cite a number and then find out I'm off, but we have scores of headquarters in all the toss-up states. We're organized, we're moving, and that's awful hard to replace in the near term. And here's the other thing. I was in the Senate a long time. Very proud of what I've done in the Senate. I was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee for a long time, and I was chairman or ranking member and chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I'm going to be going down to the Johnson Library. Anyway, I'm going to be going around making the case of the things that I think we have to finish and how we can't afford to lose what we've done or backslide on civil rights, civil liberties, women's rights. There's that little button we have. Control guns, not girls. I mean, the idea, we're sitting around, this is where Kamala's so good as well. We're sitting around, more children are killed by a bullet than any other cause of death. The United States of America. What the hell are we doing? What are we doing? We got a candidate saying, promised the NRA, don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything. You got a Supreme Court that is what you might call the most conservative court in American history. This is ridiculous. There's so much we can do still, and I'm determined to get it done. It's about freedom. And by the way, I'll end this. Well, I'm not going to do that. Haley has to come up too. But I remember I made a speech on democracy in Philadelphia at Independence Hall. And I'm not being critical, just observing. The bulk of the press said, what the hell is he talking about that for? Democracy. You did. Democracy is not an issue. Democracy is not an issue. Except the polling data showed 60% of the people knew I was right, thought I was right. I'm not asking you a question. You don't have to answer, obviously. But do you think our democracy is under siege based on this court? Do you think democracy is under siege based on Project 2025? Do you think he means what he says when he says he's going to do away with the civil service, eliminate the Department of Education, make sure, I mean, we've never been here before. And that's the other reason why you say, hand off to another generation. I've got to finish this job. I've got to finish this job because there's so much at stake.
We've had some discussions over the past few days with your press secretary about the question of health exams. And you said you take a cognitive test every day in this job. Are you open to taking another physical or test before the election? Governor Whitmer of Michigan, for instance, said it wouldn't hurt to take a test.
Well, look, two things. One, I've taken 3 significant and intense neurological exams by a neurologist. In each case, as recently as February. And they say I'm in good shape, okay? Although I do have a little problem with my left foot because it's not as sensitive because I broke my foot and didn't wear the boot. But I'm good. I'm tested every single day about my neurological capacity to do decisions I make every day. You talk to my staff, all of you talk to my staff. Sometimes my staff talks a lot. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think you have them telling you that all the major ideas we've undertaken haven't been in part initiated by me. I remember when the staff and I said, I'm going to go to South Korea, we're going to get the chip. What are you doing? I'm going to get Japan and Korea back together again after essentially having hostilities toward one another since the end of World War II. I'm going to move and see that we can expand. You know, the only thing age does is help you with it, creates a little bit of wisdom if you pay attention. And so the point I'm making is, I think it's important that if the neurologist tells me he thinks I need another exam, and by the way, I've laid every bit of the record out, hadn't hidden a thing. You ought to ask Trump for his, okay? I laid it all out. And every single day I'm surrounded by good docs. If they think there's a problem, I promise you, or even if they don't think it's a problem, they think I should have a neurological exam again, I'll do it. But no one's suggesting that to me now. And I'll ask you another question. No matter what I did, no one's going to be satisfied. Did you have 7 docs? Did you have 2? Who'd you have? Did you do this? How many times did you? So I am not opposed if my doctors tell me I should have another neurological exam, I'll do it. But that's where I am. Haley Bull, Scripps.
Thank you, Mr. President. You said you're making decisions on a day-to-day basis when it comes to support for Ukraine. Does that mean you have not closed the door on further considering lifting restrictions for U.S.-made weapons inside Russia? And if I may, your convention is coming up where your delegates are pledged to make you the official nominee. If they have second thoughts, are they free to vote their conscience?
Obviously, they're free to do whatever they want, but I get overwhelming support. Overwhelming support. I won, I forget how many votes I won in the primary. Overwhelming. And so tomorrow, if all of a sudden I show up at the convention, everybody says, we want somebody else, that's the democratic process. It's not going to happen.
Even if that means they vote for someone else?
Sure. Look, I'll end this with this. I served in the Senate a long time. I understand the impetus of candidates running for local office and whether they think the top if they can help them or not. In my state of Delaware, which was a very, at least a purple, it was a red state when I started, in terms of where you now talk red and blue. I don't recall most of the Democratic presidents winning my state when I was a candidate. The truth of the matter is I understand the self-interest of a candidate. If they think that, running with Biden at the top is going to hurt them, then they're going to run away. I get it. But so far, go and look at the polling data in their states. Look at the in-depth, and by the way, I think you'd all acknowledge, and you're all experts. I'm not being solicitous about the president. You're experts on this stuff. How accurate does anybody think the polls are these days? I can give you a series of polls where you have likely voters, me versus Trump, where I win all the time. When the unlikely voters vote, he wins sometimes. The bottom line is all the polling data right now, which I think is premature because the campaign really hasn't even started. I mean, it hadn't started in earnest yet. Most of the time, it doesn't start till after September, after Labor Day. So a lot can happen. But I think I'm the best I believe I'm the best qualified to govern. And I think I'm the best qualified to win. But there are other people who could beat Trump too. But it's awful start from scratch. And, we talk about, money raised. We're not doing bad. We got about $220 million in the bank. We're doing well. So with that, you have any want to follow up on any of that you just asked me?
Yes. You earlier explained confidence in your vice president.
Yes.
If your team came back and showed you data that she would fare better against former President Donald Trump, would you reconsider your decision to stay in the race?
No, unless they came back and said, there's no way you can win. Me. No one's saying that. No poll says that.
Mr. President,
Okay. Thank you.
This ends tonight's press conference. Thanks, everybody. This concludes.
Respectfully, earlier you misspoke in your opening answer. You referred to Vice President Harris as Vice President Trump. Right now, Donald Trump is using that to mock your age and your memory. How do you combat that criticism from tonight?
Listen to him.
This concludes tonight's press conference. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
Wow, that was President Joe Biden wrapping up that big boy press conference. Went about an hour.
Okay, Biden did all right. I think he exceeded expectations. So on some betting markets, he's now ahead of Kamala Harris to become the Democratic nominee. I still expect Joe Biden to drop out in the next few days. So I think overall he probably just mildly exceeded expectations. He sure took a lot of questions. He spoke for an hour. He wasn't horrible. But who would really want someone that sluggish and in decline as the president of the United States? So here's a serious question I've got, and it comes from the McCardle column that I read today in the Washington Post. So here we go.
This opinion piece was written by McCardle, How the Media Sleepwalked into Biden's Debate Disaster. There's only one path that can prevent another failure. In my 20 years of writing right-leaning columns at mainstream publications, I've made two arguments over and over. First, I've tried to convince my fellow journalists that liberal media bias is real, And second, I've tried to convince conservatives that, though it's real, it's not the conspiracy they imagine. This is a hard moment to make that latter point. Frankly, if we had been colluding to cover up the decline of a Democratic president, who then undid all our efforts by going on national television and breaking the story himself, well, how much different would our coverage have looked? And if he hadn't self-immolated at the debate, wouldn't our readers still be in the dark? That said, it really wasn't a conspiracy. For one thing, mainstream outlets did report on the president's age, even if too gently. Why were we so gentle? Well, there's a broad journalistic norm against picking on physical characteristics, which is why even certified Donald Trump-hating columnists have made remarkably few cracks about his comb-over.
Okay, so that's the question. When did it become socially unacceptable to comment on obvious, glaring physical characteristics? Also, why would social norms about courtesy and politeness constrain important reporting? Right? Yeah, there are many things that you should not do interpersonally, but are perfectly valid to raise on a public level in the public interest. So, for example, I'll give you very close to home example. So in Judaism, there are teachings that you should not remind a convert of his status. Does that then mean that you should never mention that this rabbi or that rabbi is a convert? And to me, obviously not. It's in the public interest. There are things that a person who converts to Judaism and then becomes a rabbi, there are things that he should not do, that he cannot do according to Jewish law. And so it's in the communal interest, in the public interest, to know which famous rabbis are converts. And then I got tremendous blowback from one Orthodox rabbi who was a convert. He's pointed out, that does not the Talmud teach you should never remind a convert of his convert status? And yeah, that is a good thing to do interpersonally. But when it comes to the public interest, right, when you are reporting on something, you should be able to notice the obvious. And so where is it socially acceptable to comment on someone's physical characteristics that are particularly compelling, whether someone is senile or someone is looking good or someone's looking bad? If I go to report on a public event or a public speech, and I've done this several times, there's been people that I've reported on, they're giving a public presentation, and I've noted that they look like they're dying from AIDS. Right? If someone does indeed look like they are dying from AIDS, is it journalistically unacceptable to point out the obvious? Right? If a president of the United States or the United States senator or anyone in an important position seems to be demonstrating the symptoms of dementia or senility, just moving and thinking and speaking very slowly, why would you not raise the obvious? I mean, why is it such a broad journalistic norm about picking on physical characteristics, except if they're important? Right? If they have relevance to national security, to what's in America's best interest, noting that Joe Biden shows many signs of senility and has since 2018, that's obviously in the public's best interest. But also, as we go through life, we often encounter physical characteristics that you can't help but notice, that grab your attention. And I recognize that most times it is socially inappropriate to publicly comment on them, but you certainly notice them. They certainly affect you. And so that which is true, right, that which has a profound effect on you, which is other people's physical characteristics, there have to be times and places to acknowledge that truth and to speak that truth and to comment on that truth, as well as times and places where it's inappropriate. But I need to do more research. When did it become inappropriate? Because I suspect in the 14th century, 15th century, 16th century, it was far more appropriate to talk on about people's physical characteristics and just note them. So I've been rereading philosopher Ronnie Goodman's great work in progress, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression, and he notes a big difference between us moderns and people in the Middle Ages. So people in the Middle Ages, they were much more emotionally labile because they didn't have this ideal of the buffered self where you felt completely self-contained and you could decide your purpose, your morality, your strategy, your path forward in life, just with the power of your own thinking. And you could create a buffered identity isolated from what's going on around you. So for people in the Middle Ages, a moment ago, they were joking. Then they would mock each other. One word would lead to another. And suddenly from the midst of laughter, they find themselves in the fiercest of feuds. Right? Do you think that people in the Middle Ages abstained from commenting on physical characteristics to the extent that we do now? Right? So many things that appear contradictory to us about people in the Middle Ages, the intensity of their piety, the violence of their fear of hell, their guilt feelings, their penitence, the immense outbursts of joy and gaiety, the sudden flaring and uncontrollable force of their hatred and their belligerence, all these, like their rapid changes of mood, are in reality symptoms of the same social personality structure. So one way of understanding people on the right is that they're more medieval, right? They have more of these characteristics than modern secular liberal humanists, right? So the instincts, right? To be on the right is to be less removed from your instincts. The emotions were vented more freely, more directly, more openly. It is only to us, in whom everything is more subdued, moderate, and calculated, and in whom social taboos are built much more deeply into the fabric of instinctual life as self-restraints, that this unveiled intensity of piety, belligerence, or cruelty appears as contradictory. So you know how refreshing it is to encounter people who just speak the truth, who notice things that you're not supposed to notice, like that Hawk Tour girl. All right, she was fun, all right, because she just gave a real, genuine remark about the pursuit of pleasure, and she didn't try to subordinate that to some greater ideological agenda, right? She was just someone who enjoyed life and its frivolities, and she didn't try to go, all sophisticated, and she didn't try to show that she was, wiser and smarter and just a better person than the masses. Right. Most important political commentator right now is Mark Halperin, most important reporter. He's independent because he got Me Too'd from his position as the political director from ABC News. So he delivered this conversation about 4 hours ago, and he is going to go live again. He is scheduled to go live in 25 minutes. I'll probably pick that up. But this is Mark Halperin.
Thank you for joining. This is a very complicated story right now. Lots of reporting from New York Times, from Politico, my reporting about where things stand. And there's a lot of people who are well-positioned, senior congressional officials, senior people in the Biden campaign, who at this hour are saying, regardless of what happens in the press conference, they don't see it's tenable for Joe Biden to go forward. Now, that's different than saying they are going to urge him to not run.
So Donald Trump is quite medieval, all right? He is much more willing to comment on people's physical characteristics. And this is one of the things that makes him socially reviled by our elite.
That's supposed to be a little bit Democrat territory, but we're leading in Nevada, and a waitress came over, beautiful waitress, and I never like talking about physics. She's beautiful inside, because you never talk about a person's look, ever. You never mention it. The other day, I got very angry. Some man called Chris Christie fat, and I said, sir, and then he said he was a pig. I said, sir, Chris Christie is not a fat pig. Please remember that. He is not a fat pig. Please take it back. And the guy's looking at me like, really? No, we have to defend people. You can't call people fat. So I said about 9 times, he is not a fat pig. That's supposed to be a little bit Democrat.
Okay, so, all right, Donald Trump is still funny.
That's different from saying they think he's convinced he can't go forward. But there are some people now saying that he is going to be told he can't win, and they believe he will reach the conclusion that he can't go forward. And there are even people saying that's going to happen very soon. Now, I don't think that's true based on what conversations I've had. And again, Joe Biden woke up this morning, and by 8:30, he had an ABC poll, a Washington Post poll showing him even with Donald Trump. And by 8:30, he had the best inflation report he'd gotten since he became president. So it's difficult to understand why so much is happening right now. Press conference at 6:30, scheduled to go to Michigan tomorrow. scheduled to do a Lester Holt interview on Monday. Other interviews are said to be in the works. But I will tell you that there are serious people now around Joe Biden and connected to congressional leadership whose attitude today is very similar to the attitude of 5 news cycles ago, which is this is untenable. And that includes, again, senior people in his campaign. No one has said to me that anyone has made the case to the president. No one has said to me that anyone's going to, although there are indications that there are congressional leaders who might. The president is most of what the body language is. They think he'll do fine in the press conference. Of course, we'll watch and see that together.
So I'll put, when I find the link to the blog post I wrote about 15 years ago on Orthodox rabbis, well-known Orthodox rabbis or converts, I'll put a link in the description. Here's a trope that I think is bogus, and it has wider implications, right? Quote, "This is Joe Biden's decision, period," end of quote. Right? There is no Joe Biden without all the people who have enabled Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden has been in public life. He's been a prominent and prestigious politician since about 1970, right? For approximately 50 years, he's been in public life. So Joe Biden without his status, Joe Biden without Jill Biden, Hunter Biden, right? His friends and allies, without his power and position, right, would not be Joe Biden in any recognizable form. So Joe Biden, just like you, just like me, we depend on other people, right? Our families, right? Our friends, our community, our bank accounts, our jobs, our hobbies, the places in life where we thrive, all right? These are all essential for making us who we are. You remove us from all of those supports, or you cut them in half, all right? You take someone who lives paycheck to paycheck, and then they lose a job and they have difficulty finding a job. They will not be a recognizable person compared to who they were when they thought they had a solid job that they did not have to worry about. So Joe Biden, just like you, just like me, depends upon other people supporting him and shoring him up. And when many of the people that he has turned to for support, but when he turns to people who tell him who he is, right? We all, to some degree, depend upon other people supporting our narratives, to reflecting back to us our own vision of ourselves. And when that support, right, when those essential people and situations in our life are taken away, we become completely unrecognizable. So Joe Biden is only Joe Biden because of the status that he has, the prestige that he has, the support that he has, the allies that he has. And if that support starts dropping off, right, if the allies start dropping off, if the polls consistently show that he's going to have a landslide loss to Donald Trump, he will not be the Joe Biden you see today. So there is no Joe Biden apart from the people who are closest to him. Right? There's no look forward apart from the people who is closest to me. Right? If you took away my family, my extended family, my friends, my community, right, my ways of earning a living, my bank account, my hobbies, my abilities, all right, then I would not be looked forward in any recognizable form. I'd be a completely different person. All right, you rip those things away, I wouldn't be here live streaming. I would not have the confidence or the strength. Joe Biden will not have the strength and the confidence to carry on as president of the United States if the people that he has traditionally turned to for support desert him. Right? There's no Joe Biden outside of the people who Joe Biden relies on. There's no Luke Ford outside of the structures, the communities, the people, the routines that I rely upon. Right? No man is an island, not even Joe Biden. Does that make sense?
Just a little bit. The meeting with the senators and the senior campaign staff, by every account I've been given, including from 2 senators who were in the meeting, did not go well. The reality is that the skeptics on Capitol Hill and in the donor class are not interested in private polling that suggests a narrow path to an electoral college victory. What senators are saying is they can't explain or defend the president's mental state, and they can't explain their previous failure to bring this up as an issue, either publicly or privately, and that they consider that to be an untenable position for 120 days of a campaign. I have swung wildly during the course of the last 2 weeks about whether I think he would be the nominee or not. I have thought mostly that he would be, because he will be the nominee unless he decides not to be. They're his delegates. But I would say right now, those of you, including some of you I see right now, who have told me for quite some time that he could not survive this, it's certainly trending that way. The other trend that has switched a little bit, that was largely trending towards, if not Biden, open convention. Things have trended a little bit back towards the vice president. I still don't know anyone who thinks that Joe Biden thinks that Kamala Harris could beat Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean if he got out, he wouldn't endorse her. And what I've spent a fair amount of time today as the congressional sources and the Biden campaign sources have started to go back to saying that they didn't think he would be the nominee, I spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out who would actually run. And I think there's about a dozen names that have been put out there of people who would run. There's two kinds of running if this is open, and open could mean with Kamala Harris in it or not. One kind of running is you're the chosen candidate of Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, that you're an anointed ticket that's considered the establishment choice. That may not work, but the delegates, remember, are all Biden-Harris delegates, and they would pick the nominee. So one is, if that group or some...
Okay, so just to follow up with a few more details on something I remarked on 15 minutes ago. So yes, can converts to Judaism become rabbis? And it doesn't bother me that there is a substantial case in Jewish law against converts, such as myself, becoming rabbis. Right? And yes, there are restrictions, right? A convert may not hold a position of Jewish communal authority. That comes from the Mishnah Torah, from Hilchos Malachim, right? This is clear from the sources, not always put into practice, but sometimes this rule is overlooked. And there are reasons why converts are restricted from holding positions of communal authority in Jewish life. And so some of the best-known Orthodox rabbis who are converts include Rabbi Y.Y. Rubenstein, perhaps the most successful United Kingdom Orthodox campus rabbi. Rabbi Shneur Zalman Gafni was for many years Rosh Yeshiva Kfar Chabad Israel. Nathan Lopez Cardoso and Yaakov Deo of Asia Torah. So there are a number of prominent Orthodox rabbis who are converts. And then Y.Y. Rubenstein, who reached out to me and said, please remove this. The Talmud says you should never remind a rabbi that he's a convert. And I said, no, it's in the public interest. It's a legitimate story. And he said, well, I'm going to destroy your life, right? I'm going to hunt down rabbis who are associated with you. I'm going to deface your Wikipedia. I'm going to sue you in secular court. I'm going to sue you in religious court. I will no limits. My wrath will essentially know no limits. And I said, okay. So I was all prepared to take down his name from the post because a rabbi made a personal appeal to me, a rabbi to whom I had some obligations, and out of deference to this particular friendship, I was all prepared to remove the Rabbi Y.Y. Rubenstein's name. And Rabbi Rubenstein was not satisfied with that. I had to recognize that I was wrong and that he was right. And so he goes on and on. Can you tell me who converted you? What criteria did you apply to your decision? Why does that outweigh halakha in your mind? Right? so I said I applied journalistic criteria, just as if you went to have surgery this week, you'd want your doctors to follow the latest medical technology rather than Talmudic medical practices. Rabbis are public figures. Their feelings don't matter to me when it comes to publishing elementary facts. He says, well, you are wrong. I would want my doctor to follow the latest medical practice if it did not offend or contradict halakha. I have forwarded this correspondence to the rabbi who wrote the piece, and you will see below that I'm trying to contact whoever converted you to let them know and read your views and unconcern for others' feelings and for halacha. I respond, dear Rabbi Rubenstein, I see that your concern with halacha, Jewish law, is highly selective, does not apply to the halacha against reading others' mail, as you say that you forwarded my private email that I sent just to you, and you went ahead and forwarded it to others without permission. I do not want you to violate halakha unnecessarily, so I now give you permission to forward my emails to you to anyone you want. I may blog about this discussion then, as you have decided to move it around. So I would never, and have never, to the best of my knowledge, in personal conversation, brought up someone's conversion status unless the person made it clear that it was fine. But if someone is a public figure, like Rabbi Y.Y. Rubenstein and many of these other rabbis, and I was writing about them for publication, then of course the fact of their conversion is relevant. And so I love this interaction because it's so typical of many of my interactions with religious Jews. When the halakha is to their advantage, they cite it. When the halakha gets in the way of what they want to do, they ignore it. Right, back to Mark Halperin.
Nancy Pelosi, maybe Jim Clyburn. If that group decides we're for a ticket, or maybe just we're for a presidential candidate and they can pick their running mate, that's one kind of running. That kind of running comes with a great earned media. It comes with presumably a persuasive argument with the delegates who are Biden-Harris delegates. Presumably it comes with the ability to raise money from their financial circles, maybe help from their veteran campaign advisors. The other kind of running is there isn't that kind of laying on hands, maybe by some of those people, but not in a way that creates a clear favorite. And then the question is, who wants to get in that race? And getting in that race with Kamala Harris in it is different than getting in it without her in it. I think there's a big assumption that these people would all get in, and it would be a challenge to figure out who is allowed to address the convention, who's on a ballot if there is a ballot. I'm not so sure based on the calls I've had today. I think the reality is, and this is something that concerns a lot of senior people in the party, it's easy to say, oh, Gretchen Whitmer. It's easy to say Josh Shapiro. These people have done nothing like run for president. And there's a concern about their ability to handle the scrutiny.
Right. So if someone had a big scar on their face, right, I can't imagine myself commenting on it to the person or in a public setting where it caused the person pain. But with friends, where I could bring it up privately, is like, yeah, I bring it up. If a candidate for president or the president of the United States, right, developed a big prominent scar across his face, I'd mention it. If the walk of the president of the United States has changed, as Joe Biden's walk has changed, I'd certainly talk about it. It's worthy of attention. If his voice quality changes, that's worthy of attention. If he starts to look particularly old, or starts to look particularly frail or infirm, or it appears that his memory's going, or that his mental acuity is dropping, or he's demonstrating many of the characteristics of senility, to me, it's obvious that it's in the public interest that you mention these things. It just strikes me as utterly bizarre that apparently for almost all our leading journalists, it's a very sensitive topic. It's a very sensitive topic interpersonally, right? It's not a very sensitive topic when you're talking about the national interests of the United States, right? Dianne Feinstein ran, way past her due date, right? She died in office. She hung on to power way too long. She was obviously senile, infirm, incapable of doing her job. And that received quite a lot of media attention, as it should have. I think Strom Thurmond ran for office and served in the U.S. Senate until he was pretty close to age 100. And many senators are of, great old age into their 80s, and some of them are still quite sharp, such as Senator Charles Grassley from, is it Iowa? Right. So many people in their 80s are still sharp. Joe Biden is not one of them. And so I just don't get the hesitation. I guess for me, all right, norms of courtesy and politeness don't extend and don't minimize and don't hold one back from reporting in the public interest. Right? If America's national security is threatened by having a senile commander in chief, right, that strikes me as obviously a necessary story to report. If there are all sorts of things that a convert to Orthodox Judaism who becomes a rabbi should not do, then it's obviously in the communal interest for that to be known. Right? There are all sorts of positions in the community that many parts of halakha say a convert should not take on. If someone's a convicted felon, all right, I usually wouldn't bring that up interpersonally, but if they were a convicted felon for theft and then they volunteer to be the secretary of the treasurer for my particular 12-step group, I think it'd be worth bringing up, hey, this person's got a history with theft.
And most people in Trump world think it's hilarious that these people think that they can survive the scrutiny that would come. There's no one on the list, who strikes fear in the hearts of Mar-a-Lago, which is not to say they take it for granted. But the capacity to launch a campaign and not have your family destroyed is something on the minds of some of the people mentioned all the time. You could say that Gavin Newsom is the obvious choice if what you're looking for is someone who's been at the highest levels. Because if you say Bashir, Cooper, Whitmer, Wes Moore, these people have not played at anything like this level. They've gotten no scrutiny. So you say, well, Gavin Newsom, governor of California, on national media all the time, major league skills. But then I'd urge you, if you think that, to go watch his debate with Ron DeSantis, where he was not that great, in my view. He certainly didn't blow him away. And so the reality is, you can play fantasy football and mix and match any two people. And of course, the one that people mix and match the most is Shapiro and Whitmer, because those two states are so critical. But it's having covered a lot of presidential campaigns and observing those people and meeting some of them and knowing some of them, I couldn't tell you that any of them would be stronger than Joe Biden, which is, of course, a lot of what Joe Biden thinks as well. So if Joe Biden withdraws, we'll have to see what Harris does. We'll have to see what these other Democratic leads do. To go back to the first question, we've seen very clear indications, publicly and privately. Pelosi very publicly, Schumer and Jeffries more privately, but clearly in the last 24 hours, all of them have made clear they're not just going to sit back and let Donald Trump run against Joe Biden. His task of proving to people that he should be the nominee who are skeptical is very difficult, because at this point, most of them, from what they say, they can't be satisfied. They don't care how many interviews or town halls he does, although they're skeptically do them. They want medical records and they want sustained performance. And that's not happening. So I understand it. There'll be no more medical transparency. There'll be no more wide open events. So we'll see about the press conference. Last two things I'll say, and then I want to bring in a couple folks. It's still his nomination, and as of this morning, my understanding
let's
was he was
get
not.
Dooovid onto the show. Dooovid, what's going on?
Thank God, Baruch Hashem, praise the Lord. I was watching the Biden press conference, and you actually came up in the YouTube recommended videos right off of ABC. So good for you.
Oh, wow. Anything about this Joe Biden story that's caught your attention? I mean, in particular, are there Jewish teachings when someone in a position of power and authority who has to perform at a certain level no longer has the ability to perform at that level? Any teachings that come to mind, or do you have any thoughts on this general story of Joe Biden's dramatic decline?
I would have to look it up. I don't remember offhand. I mean, there are a lot of rules for judges, and I'm not sure if age is part of it. I mean, you have a lot of like rabbis that serve till the end of their life, like Rabbi Wolfson. I mean, but often, they like children or successors start taking roles away, or their power of just coming to them for extremely important decisions. So I'm I was mentioning like whether Biden could have played that, and instead of just pretending the obvious isn't obvious, and saying like, okay, even though he has obvious cognitive decline, even though there's a very realistic chance that he might die, God forbid, in the next few years, but that yet still give a case why he should be president, and maybe like the experience or the cool rash decisions, but I don't think he could. Like in the rabbinic circle, you have a lot of rabbis that will be the leading rabbi. In fact, usually like the Gadol Ador is like always in their 80s, 90s, lives to like 100. But they're not like all over the place. They just make the few decisions, the most important decisions. You like Moshe Feinstein or something like that. He wrote letters, and like people would bring the really tough questions to him that he would have time to think about, and his experience would matter. But I can't picture a president being like that.
Okay, so you're wondering what was the connection between revealing something publicly that would be considered bad form to reveal privately, interpersonally, socially. And so my point is, yeah, generally you don't point out that someone is suffering from senility. Right? You don't point out that someone is a convert to Orthodox Judaism. You don't point out sensitive, damaging personal information about people and their characteristics. That is not a good idea interpersonally. All right, it's considered uncouth and socially unacceptable and can get you punched in the face. On the other hand, if you are reporting on the United States of America, or you're reporting on things that are in the communal or national interest, then you may well note observations that someone seems to be demonstrating signs of senility, or you may note that someone's a convicted felon, or that they're a convert to Orthodox Judaism, that you would not bring up socially, interpersonally, because it would not be appropriate. So what is inappropriate interpersonally is often quite appropriate, in fact, mandatory, if you want to be seriously reporting or discussing communal or national interests. So any thoughts on that point?
Yeah, I mean, just first to mention, because I've been taking care of my mom for 5 years now, and she's suffered cognitive decline, and like for a period, like it was upsetting, and she did not want to be you're reminded that she has cognitive decline, and now she's kind of recognized that she definitely needs the help and appreciates the help, but I'm extremely careful, like, not to embarrass my mom about forgetting things. Just I went to the Detroit Historical Museum with her the other day, and they had a thing on Jewish Detroit history there, and there were countless things that she just forgotten, names of people or historical things. And so, like, I'm very careful. Sometimes I'll like gently remind her, like, "Oh, you once knew this," or "We had discussed this before. You maybe forgot." But I never even use the word like "you're suffering cognitive decline." However, if she was going to do something that was dangerous and for her own health, and that she thought she could do that she shouldn't do. So I mean, she's still driving. That's not been an issue, or various things. Then it might have to get more forceful. And my mom's 10 years younger than Biden. How old did your father live to?
90, and he was sharp until final days.
I mean, he took care of himself, or did he have assistance?
He basically took care of himself. I mean, he had a wife who would assist him with some things, but he was sharp. He was cognitively sharp until the end.
I mean, my dad's still working, and he's turning 74, but I mean, he has some memory. I mean, he recognizes memory's not as good as it used to be, and accepts my help. So just, yeah, I mean, you don't want to go around embarrassing people, like that's just bad character.
Right, but
And
the point is that there are different norms for different situations. So what you don't do interpersonally, if your job or responsibility, or as if you're talking about something on a communal or a national level, and someone has something going on personally that is a risk to the community or to the nation, then if you are in a serious position to report on what's going on, you have to mention these things.
Yeah, I mean, obviously. So I mean, that should be 100%. We're just talking about qualifications, like the obvious, and like, unfortunately, it was saying, like, the gerontocracy,
Yeah.
President Biden,
Are
politicians. It is across the board. I mean, generationally, the wealth and even competency of America was with the boomers, and unfortunately, probably Generation X or whatever after the boomers is not actually as competent or qualified to take over. And then there's also the wealth, because most of the wealth in America was built up during the boomer generation. So the next generation even Generation X and the later generations have less and less wealth, and the boomers have not been so forthcoming in passing on the wealth. In fact, most luxury items, and I'm not sure if you've seen the studies, but I'm saying like most boomers are like Biden, like they live likely young until they die, until they have terminal health issues. And there's been studies like the majority of luxury spending is actually spent by boomers.
Yeah. Okay, Dooovid, I'm going to cut this short for now. I want to go live to Mark Halperin. He's just started a live stream, so I want to play some excerpts from that. So
Okay, yeah, great.
I'll
Nice
talk to you
talking. God
at
bless.
greater
Good to
length.
see you.
Yeah, I'll talk to you at greater length in the future.
Everybody, thank you for joining us again. I love two-way.
So this is like I'm about 2 minutes behind here, so I'm playing it at 1.25 speed, so 2 minutes away from being live.
You can go on cable if you'd like and watch the same stuff being done and angry partisanship and spinning. That's not what we are doing here. Here we're having a conversation, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're watching on here in two-way on the platform. Thank you for joining. I'm going to run through really quickly what I think I've figured out in the brief time since the press conference ended. Then Joe Scarborough is with us, a bunch of other people want to hear from, and then we'll get to your questions. I think that the dominant sort of CW from people who want Joe Biden to step down is it wasn't enough. I don't think there's any avoiding that that's what they're saying. We've had Jim Himes, the top guy on intelligence for the Democrats from Connecticut, come out and join the ranks of those saying President Biden shouldn't run. He looked great. He didn't sound great, the raspy voice, but he looked great. Again, I don't think that's subjective. Except for getting the name of his vice president wrong, I didn't hear a lot of errors. And I think it's easy to say if you support President Biden, you want him to continue. It's easy to say it's unfair to judge that negatively, that press conference negatively. One error, blatant error, lots of facts, answered all the questions, didn't seem at all, and look at all like the guy from Atlanta. I'll tell you the two reasons I think that it's a problem for people in Congress, particularly and donors who want him to go. The two biggest problems he has now with the people who want him to step down are that he can't win, and that he's lost too much capacity, mental acuity to continue. On those 2 points, I think he was not sufficiently different from the posture he and his team have had for the last few days that really bothers the people who want him to go. On acuity, he suggested to my ear that his neurological exams had been released. They haven't. He avoided the opportunity to say he would take a thorough neurological exam and release it. That will trouble the people who believe he's a ticking time bomb for the party. And on the question of can he win, he said no one showed him any polls that say he can't. And that's true, objectively. It's July, but again, the way he talked about whether anyone had told him he can't win will bother people who want him to get out. Probably the biggest thing that I know of that's occurred since the end of the press conference is CNN's reported that Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama have spoken at least once of late. And I think that's key because I think if you're looking for people to take to the president the notion that he should get out, it's much more likely to be Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama, as fraught as the Obama-Biden relationship is, than it is Jeffries and Schumer. So I think we're back now looking, as some of us thought even before her Morning Joe appearance, that this is really about Nancy Pelosi and what she thinks she can do and wants to do. The president, again, you couldn't watch that and think this is a guy thinking of getting out. It was a guy who thinks he's going to be the nominee. And we're back now, I think, to thinking about running out the clock. Nancy Pelosi is very aware of the clock, and I think it's just a question of whether she chooses to try to force his hand in some way or appeals to him in some way to get him out before he's nominated. So Joe has to go to sleep because apparently he's on television early. So Joe, I'll ask you to unmute. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I said and just your overall thoughts on where you think the press conference leaves us.
I think it leaves us where we were before the press conference. Had this happened before the debate, then I think a lot of people would have looked at it and they would have been fine with it. On the substance of the debate, I mean, obviously there was a gaffe off the top of the debate, just like there was the gaffe when he was introducing President Zelensky. You look at the substance of the debate. There was sort of to and fro. There were high points. There were not high points. You take the question though that David Sanger asked him about President Xi, and just I challenge anybody to print out the response to that answer, or what he was talking about when he was sitting with Golda Meir in the cabinet back in 73, 74, whenever it was, and look at the substance of it, just on the transcript, and compare that to any press conference Donald Trump ever gave. And there's really no comparison. We are judging him by a different standard. I know a lot of people, including my wife, would say that's not fair. Well, I don't know. I don't know anybody that's been in politics that would tell you that there's anything fair about politics. Politics is not fair. Politics it often has more to do with style over substance. I will say just two quick points. One, again, the debate hangs over everything that is happening moving forward. Because, but for the debate, I could tell you that Joe Biden didn't sound any worse tonight than he sounded in 1987 when he was chased from the race in the did I say 77, 87? 87, when he was chased from the 88 presidential campaign on a series of one gaffe after another gaffe after another gaffe. We could go to 2008, the same thing, one gaffe after another gaffe after another gaffe. That is Joe Biden. That's Joe Biden. One of the reasons why the establishment is having a hard time getting Joe Biden out of the race is because he's been mocked for so long. So as far as Biden about has he lost one step or two steps? Yeah, he slowed down a lot, and that's a comment that I made about all my times talking to him. Biden has slowed down. He has stiffened up. He still, when you talk to him, not that substance matters to a lot of people, but when you talk to him at least about foreign policy, or you talk to him about getting a deal through, a bipartisan deal through, when Republicans and progressives are mocking him for thinking that he can pass bipartisan legislation, Biden knows how to do it better than most people. It just, history will show that. I really don't give a damn whether people on this call or people on watching Morning Joe or anybody else believe that. History will show that about Joe Biden. Is it fair that he's being judged by the debate? No, it's not fair, but that's the reality. I do want to say, though, I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent, but I have spent more time around Democrats, obviously, of late. And I will say they are such whiners. They are such worriers. And I will say this whole polling argument is insane. The polling argument, Joe Biden can't win. The polls in July are bad. Mark, if you'd like, I can forward you a Politico article that I just checked, because I know you and I have always talked about how bad the polling was, not in 22, which it was bad, because everybody that came on my show and everybody that was on Fox and everybody on CNN was talking about a red wave that never showed up. But you and I always talk about the polls before 2020. And I don't remember a whole lot of tweets, thank God, that I've done. But I remember one tweet I did right before the 2020 election where I said, I don't believe any polls. Because there was an ABC News Washington Post poll that showed Joe Biden leading in Wisconsin by 17 points. It ended up being bullshit. It was neck and neck to the very end. The same thing, you look at the Real Clear Politics average, and in the same article that I'm going to forward you, because I know you'll be fascinated by it, the Real Clear Politics average in Michigan, right before the election, was +9, Joe Biden. So Democrats in July who were melting down and jumping off of cliffs saying, oh, we can't win because all these internal polls are coming back and they're bad. Polling is about trends. I get that. But I just think the Democrats better have a solid plan B, a solid plan C, if they're going to throw Biden over the cliff. Is it fair? No, it may not be fair, but Biden may have to go. I will say I am surprised based on some calls that I made and that were verified by you and some of the reporting that you were doing quietly. I expected him to be closer to leaving the race tonight. I expected him to leave more of an opening to get out possibly even by this weekend, based on some things that I've been hearing. The Joe Biden I saw tonight, I did not see that at all. And I will tell you, the people that I talked to, and I know, Mark, the people that you talked to were well placed. And we had reasons to believe that Joe Biden was, in fact, considering stepping down. That's not what it sounded like tonight. And I just don't think, though, the Democrats, I don't think they're going to stay with him, because most Democrats believe, and I will say I believe this, that this race is extraordinarily important. There is an existential threat to American democracy, in my belief, as far as I believe. So I think Democrats know they have to get this right. And if this were any other presidential race, they would probably do what Republicans did with Bob Dole in 1996, when we all went to the convention and we knew he was going to lose. But we stayed with him because he was Bob Dole and it was his term. I don't think Democrats are going to do that for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, thank you. Lauren Leader.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable following Joe Scarborough because I do it at least once or twice a week, and always love that opportunity. I mean, I disagree on a few things. One is that on the polling, I mean, I'll come back to the bigger picture, but just I have to make the polling point. I was one of the people on the show, Joe, you'll remember, who didn't say there was going to be a red wave. There was a lot of there are like the polling averages, and then there are these like wacky outlier polls, and there were a bunch of really wacky outlier polls right before the 22 midterms that made no sense. Wall Street Journal had one, the Times had one, and they didn't make sense relative to the like vast majority of polls. Americans don't change their minds that fast on a dime. You don't have like consistent polling for months at a time, and then all of a sudden they change, 2 weeks before an election. So I always thought that was overblown. I think this is different, and it's different for a couple reasons. One is that I think the concerns about the president were so strong before the debate that it actually in the end wasn't really about the failure of his debate. It was really about what the debate did to reinforce all the things that people were worried about already. And, Mark and I have done these amazing sessions over the last few months with, the double haters, the people who weren't happy with either of these choices, the folks that were concerned about Biden. I will tell you, like the night of the debate, I saw 10 Democrats at a party who all said to me, I'm going to vote for the president, but obviously we know he's not with it. So, a lot of that narrative was there, and that's, I think, a huge part of why people are freaking out. It isn't just about the debate, and I think it's a failure of the president, who I support and who I have supported, and I'm a Biden delegate, full transparency. I think it is his failure not to acknowledge that people had concerns that were beyond just the singular debate night. And I also think that he is not, I think there are a couple of things he needs to do he hasn't done, and then I'll turn it back to Mark. One is that I've been saying this for months on Morning Joe. The president has not done a strong enough job laying out his vision for the future, aside from saying, I want to get the job done. I don't know what that means. I want to know specifically, what is the president planning to do about the crisis in the Supreme Court, about the issues with Roe v. Wade? He puts up big signs that say, restore Roe. I can't tell you how he's planning on doing that. He has not made a strong case about that. He hadn't done that before the debate. The second thing, and he didn't do it tonight, although he was specifically asked when asked about the vice president, I do believe he has to specifically address what happens if he becomes ill, if he declines in his second term, or if, God forbid, he dies in the second term. Tonight he said, okay, I wouldn't have picked the vice president if I didn't believe in her. Then he made the gaffe we all now know about. But he hasn't made a strong enough case about why Americans should feel very confident that if there are people saying to him, you can't complete a second term, that he will step aside then, and that he has a strong plan to make sure that the vice president can step up. So I think there are things he can do to save this if he's staying in. But I also, like Joe and like many of us, worry that the tide is impossible to stem at this point. I did get some calls today. I know that several Democratic Northeastern governors, specifically on private calls today, told the president they thought it was time for him to go. So there's still more of that happening behind the scenes. And but nobody knows what's ahead. And I agree with Joe. He definitely did not sound like he was leaving tonight. But I can also imagine he might not sound like that up until the day that he actually does step aside. And also, he may never be doing it. He has this important speech. Someone said in the text, there is an important speech he's giving Monday at the LBJ Library about democracy. He's going to keep at it, but it's hard to imagine how this tide totally stems for him.
Lauren, are you saying that that governors have told him directly they don't want him to run?
I know that there are a lot of conversations that are happening one-on-one between him and other electeds in the Northeast and beyond who privately, are expressing their concerns. And I think I don't think that's a big secret. It's like the worst kept secret in Washington. Private secret meeting of the Democrats where nobody brings in their cell phone except everybody tells everybody what happened in the meeting 5 minutes after. So I think we know
that's different, but that's different than people saying it to him directly.
That's true.
But you believe people have said it to him directly?
I know of at least one.
Okay, interesting. Joe, I don't want to lose you before, and obviously stay if you can, but I'm just curious what you think, because you know Nancy Pelosi pretty well, and she came on your program. Yeah. Do you think she is now going to try to do whatever it takes to get him out?
No, it's interesting. Somebody was asked about Chris Dodd the other night on one of these calls, if Chris Dodd would tell him that they needed to get out, and said that's not how Chris Dodd works. Well, that's not how Nancy works, and I don't think that's how any politician work their way it works. She may, if she does talk to him, she may tell him the challenges that are facing him. And the thing is, he can't keep losing.
Right, following the Mark Halperin show.
You can't have 10, 20, 30, then 40 Democratic members of Congress saying you need to get out of the race. I mean, we are, people say we're in a 50-50 nation. I think we're probably more like in a 46-46 nation. And that requires that every single person on your side gets out and votes, and that they're pulled out of their home like Ken Mehlman did to Republicans in 2004, and what we saw both sides doing in 2020. And you just can't do that with 10, 15, 20, 30 defections in your own party. So something's got to give. They've got to figure out how to bring those people back, or I think leaders will continue going to him, tell him he needs to step aside, because losing's just not an option in this election. They have to be unified, and they have to get more votes than Donald Trump.
But presumably, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. No.
I mean, presumably they'll stop trying to get him out unless he has some medical issue after he's nominated, right? I mean, they don't have that much more time to get him out.
No, they do not have. They have until everybody votes. The delegates vote. When is that? Early August, like maybe the
20th. It starts on the 20th of August. Yeah.
No. The convention.
The convention, right?
But the
voting
virtual
poll,
roll
yeah.
call. The virtual roll call is TBD, but it's earlier than that. And the Biden strategy seems to be to run out the clock. Let's start going to questions for Joe or Lauren, or for me, or just a statement you want to make. Lenny Glenn, please unmute.
All right, listening to Mark Halperin's live stream.
I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I typed in a question, and I guess it's sort of a question I think you might pose, Mark, to the group. Is there anyone on this call that did not come away from that presser with the impression that you have a well-intentioned, drifty, elderly man who lacks the passion and the intensity to fight against Donald Trump for the next 4 months without slipping big time? I mean, to me, Joe, I love Joe. Joe's done a wonderful job. He's going to be a well-regarded president. As a candidate, I want someone more passionate, and also someone whose own mental acuity takes that issue off the table for the Democrats and puts it back on the table where it belongs, running against a ranting lunatic who says crazy nonsense every day and lies with every breath he takes. Joe Biden can't press that case against Trump. Trump will turn around and say, Grandpa, don't pay attention to Grandpa. I mean, that's the vibe that he gives off. I mean, the substance was pretty good, although, Mark, I would say.
Right. Joe Biden exceeded expectations in this press conference, but no one who wants the Democrats to compete and to possibly win the presidency truly wants Joe Biden to be their standard bearer.
He largely dodged answering a lot of those questions. He went off in tangents and rambled. It wasn't a disaster, but it sure as hell didn't leave me the sense that this is a guy who can carry the ball for the next 4 months and not fumble 5 times.
Hey, Mark, do you mind if I ask Lenny? Lenny, who? I understand what you're saying, because a lot of people share that fear. Who's the alternative? Do you have a candidate that you believe
I would
stand on the stage next to Donald Trump and give as good as they get?
I think there's multiple options, but we have the issue is, I think Kamala, given a fair shot, can probably prosecute Trump pretty well. I don't think Trump would agree to debate her. I think he'd be afraid of her.
Who would be your favorite, Lenny? Who would you?
I mean, in an ideal world, I don't know. Maybe the governor, maybe Newsom from California, maybe Amy Klobuchar. I mean, there's a lot of talent that Joe was going to build a bridge to and promised to that is being held back. And also in general, I think, in the country. And the polls show this too. There's an enormous weariness with this endless gerontocracy, with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Joe, Trump, Even Nancy. I mean, you got people hanging on into their mid to late 80s.
All right. I got to say one thing about this, though. Let's just be honest. You know, Nancy Pelosi was at the height of her power and effectiveness in her 80s and was extraordinary throughout the last few years of her term, and stepped down with grace and humility at the time that it was time to pass on the torch. But I mean, look, I thought Joe did an extraordinary job this morning in kind of doing the if-thens and sort of balancing these two sides of the coin, which is that neither of these situations are perfect. But you know, let's not forget too that Hillary Clinton in 2016, you know, pretty effectively held Trump's feet to the fire, was widely viewed to have won all of those debates, you know, prosecuted that case on the national stage over and over again with vigor, and still lost. And so I think some of us get lost in the, like, how much does it matter? How much of the, like, you know, shouting in the, you know, shouting people down and prosecuting the case like a prosecutor versus like what voters actually really care about. They clearly care about the age issue, but I just don't think that like the debate and the sort of like putting Trump on the ropes thing is necessarily like a great measure of whether or not someone can win the presidency, because it didn't work for Hillary.
Believe me, if we get a younger candidate, Trump will not debate.
Well, he'll be afraid to. Yeah.
He won't want that.
Lenny, I love listening to you and colloquy with Joe and with Lauren. And I'll just say, in your expression of how you felt about President Biden's performance tonight and your genuine general anxiety over his being the candidate, I thought you spoke for multitudes. I saw lots of heads nodding here, and I think you did a great job of enunciating the general fear, respect for Joe Biden's accomplishments, and delighted if he wins, but real concerned that he won't.
Mark, to your point, I was a speechwriter for Bill Clinton in 1992. I spent 6 months in Little Rock. In the ideal world, I'd like a 50-year-old Bill Clinton to attack Joe Biden. I mean, you need talent, passion, and energy in the candidate. I didn't see that tonight. I'm sorry. He adequately got through it. But that's it.
Okay. Lenny, thank you. Thank you. Eric Stratton, please unmute. Go ahead.
All right, this is Mark Halperin, his live stream with Joe Scarborough and some other political elites talking about Joe Biden's press conference.
So I think one big issue I see with Biden's gaffes and how he appears to have a serious cognitive decline is really just some of it is just his old speech impairment where he had stuttering problems. And I think that I don't know how he can explain that, because there's so much discrimination against people with disabilities, and he has a disability that relates to speech, or at least he seems to. And I just think that's an issue that should come up in the media because of how prevalent a problem, how discrimination against the disabled is a serious problem. And I just think, unfortunately, he can't campaign on saying that he has a disability, which is why he sounds less like he has it together. And I was also wondering about if Kamala Harris's baggage as former district attorney would come up, where she wanted to send parents of truant kids to prison. Is that true? Or there was something related to that. I forgot the details. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, that would be an issue. Trump would run to her left on those issues if she were the nominee, for sure. Jacqueline, thank you. I want to bring in, if I can, if he's not in his pajamas, Liam Donovan. Liam, can you unmute and come on camera? Is that possible? There you go. Here. Liam, if you're unable to get a Zoom going with 535 members of Congress and you want some one-stop shopping, Liam is your man. Liam, I'm just wondering what you think. Where do you think we are now with the Democrats and their reaction to what the president did tonight and the options they have if they do want to try to get the president to reconsider?
It's interesting because of the timing. You had this moratorium to some degree on trying to put out these statements during NATO, particularly among some of these leaders in the national security space. And so in the immediate aftermath of the presser, you had both Adam Schiff, who former Intel chair and the next senator from California, and Jim Himes, the current ranking member, the Intelligence Committee, both coming out, one of the bigger names of the dozen or so members that have come out against Biden, that is not a reflection of his performance. And so I think there's a little bit of a lag in the reaction, because he turned in, I'd say on a curve, sort of a B minus performance, maybe a little bit better than that, certainly better than debate, good enough to get to Monday. But the problem is the blood's in the water. There's no way to satisfy the people who are unsatisfied. Nothing will make them happy. Yeah. All Biden can do is make it through the news cycle, hopefully get through to Monday and Tuesday, when ideally some of the spotlight starts to shift to Republicans, the VP.
And a good comment in the chat. I'm a speech pathologist. His problem is not stuttering. That's been so overused as an excuse. It's ridiculous. He's grappling with age and a neurological issue and definite cognitive decline.
Stakes, what's going on in Milwaukee, which could lighten his load a little bit. But the most he can do is sort of stanch the bleeding a bit. I think he did enough to get through, but this is not going to go away. There's no way to hit a threshold whereby things go back to the way they were. And I think the biggest problem is Democrats have been playing home field advantage so long from a media standpoint. Your dominant media, Mark, has flipped their presumption when it comes to Biden and anything Biden and his team are saying. And so I think that's the tricky part, is you're playing sort of the zebras are no longer on your side. And I think that's a new phenomenon for this administration and for this campaign.
Right. CNN reports that Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi are still trying to get Joe Biden out. Right. Many people on Capitol Hill feel that this is the end for Biden's candidacy, that it is clear, just a matter of how it plays out even after this news conference. So both Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama believe it's absolutely essential for Joe Biden to drop out.
And so it's really hard to see, other than getting to Chicago, surviving that long, and hoping, to your point, I think when you were talking to Joe and talking to Lauren, there is a point at which this flips, right? There's a moment where people have to, it's the Jerry Nadler phenomenon, where he went through the cycles of grief very quickly, but going from, okay, Joe, you got to get out, and then realizing, okay, the resignation stage of, okay, we have to stick with him. And there will be a point where the organizing principle becomes, this is existential, so we have to get behind Biden because Project 2025 and the stakes are too high. And so the point is, or the question is, where is that tipping point? And at what point do people acknowledge, okay, we're with Joe and we just have to make the best of this?
Liam, I want to ask you, thank you for all that. I want to ask you about two groups when you already mentioned, and how you think, what you think of them going forward. First, I thought the press's questions tonight weren't particularly good, either for the public or for President Biden. I thought they were, in totality, they were pretty flabby. They didn't really produce the kind of concentrated responses that I think we needed. But I thought they were not nearly, as used the shorthand word, they weren't particularly hostile, right? They weren't the tone of the briefing room. So it's possible that's already started to diminish a little bit. What did you think of the tone and substance of the questions?
I didn't think they were great. I mean, there was a lot of process. It's a lot of, what do you think of the polls? I mean, these are things we're not going to elicit insightful answers, I don't think. I don't know, better than I do how these things work, how they figure out who to choose from. So when you can choose who you're going to get the questions from, maybe you're going to get you're not calling Peter Ducey. So you're not going to get anything.
Poor Ducey sitting there lonely and sad.
Exactly. So you're not going to get a screwball that you don't know how to handle it. It did at some points it played to his strengths, such as they are, getting into some of the foreign policy details that he's passionate about, and that came through even as he stumbled, even as he fudged some words. I thought that brought out some of the vigor that we don't always see with him. So I thought that was good. Does that translate in other contexts? I'm not so sure, but I still think there's just this sense that the media is so ticked at the fact that they were sort of taken advantage of over the past year plus. And I don't think they're gonna forget that anytime soon. And they're not going to take these answers at face value. They're going to continue to push. But I think I agree with you. I don't think they were great questions. But when you get that opportunity, it's tough to know quite what to ask, because I think everybody was looking to make some news, and instead you ended up with kind of a muddle.
I think Mark, also a lot of it is time, place, manner. It was at the end of a NATO conference. Mm-hmm. So it's far different than the White House press room, which is going to, I think they're going to remain hostile. And they're going to stay after the story, because when you have, it is an active, ongoing story. When you have people saying they're going to go talk to Joe Biden, when you have people talking about him possibly getting out, when you have different members getting out all the time, when you have the Senate meeting today, which a lot of senators found deeply unsatisfying, this is an active, ongoing story. But I will say, following up on what Liam said, I commented to you about this, Mark, throughout the press conference. I was getting texts from Democrats throughout the press conference, and it would be like, "Oh my God, oh that's horrible, and they were overwhelmingly negative, the people that were texting me, when he was giving what I thought would be like a thoughtful answer on his long-term relationship with she. And I asked them what they meant. And they, like Liam said, there's blood in the water. So they're going to, Democrats are now scared, and they're going, it's always going to be post-debate for so many half glass empty.
Thank you, Joe. Liam, I want to ask you about one other thing, which is the Republicans. If you were programming the convention, it seems to me there's two broad ways to include in the messaging what's going on with President Biden now. One is to mock him, and the other is to make the very muscular national security argument that he's simply not equipped to be commander-in-chief. Would you incorporate a lot of either or both of those into the program, or would you make those minimal? Oh, sorry, let me unmute you. I'm sorry. Go ahead and unmute me.
Yeah, it's tough, Mark. I think the if you let the candidate go to his own devices, and
Come on, man. This is Mark Halperin's live stream immediate
it's
reactions.
probably what I would expect to see on Truth Social right now. Just heavy mocking. I mean, that is his lingua franca. So I think it's really a question for Chris and Susie of how best to play this. And I think there's a real. I mean, not that it stopped him to date, but there is a way to overplay your hand here and further hurt yourself with seniors if you're not mindful of how you're treating this and deliberate about how you're treating this. So I think the programming does matter. I would say leaning into his weakness, what our adversaries are thinking here. Even the fact that we're having this discourse right now, regardless of what you think about Biden's capacity right now, the idea that we're even openly talking about whether he can serve out the rest of this term, whether he has another 4 years. I mean, that is something that is, I think, profoundly unstable and untenable, certainly for 4 more years. And it's not getting better. And that's the thing, is whatever you think of him right now, this is going to decline further. But I think they do have to be careful. And I think, one thing I've noticed over the last year is, unlike the previous 8 years of Team Trump, he is listening and seems to be determined to win in a way that he wasn't in 2016 and he wasn't in 2020. And I think the choice between the White House and the jailhouse is probably clarifying in that regard. So I'd imagine he'll listen to his team, and I would imagine that his team will be deliberate in that regard and try not to, do anything that's too heavy-handed in the mocking in a way that's going to blow back and hurt Republicans with seniors.
I predict if Tom Cotton's the speaker, and I predict he'll be pretty heavy on this theme. That'd be my prediction. Tyson Benson, unmute, please.
Man, shit. I'm just sit and I'm amazed. When you gave that story about earlier today about the dead Congresswoman, I had to go look it up to actually verify. And then there it was. And I'm just like, and I try and pride myself in the amount of keeping up with the news, and I didn't even know about it. And
just let me clarify for people who are on the earlier call. That's okay. One of the incidents that has occurred during the Biden presidency is when he addressed a member of Congress from Indiana who passed away, and the explanation by his press secretary was that the deceased congresswoman was top of mind of the president, and that's why he tried to speak to her at a public event. And again, I don't understand why at the time the press didn't make a big deal or a bigger deal of it, and why people didn't see it as an obvious sign of cognitive decline. That's different than saying Putin when you mean Zelensky, something we all do. Anyway, Tyson, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's just, I'm a moderate Democrat here in Macomb, Michigan. And have to have more cigars after all of this is going on. What I do appreciate about the Democratic Party right now is that they're actually having this conversation. They don't get excommunicated if something comes along the lines with such as what's going on in the Republican Party. So it's good to have this conversation. But my God, if we want to win, we have to have some profiles and courage in Congress, in the Senate, to have those tough conversations. Maybe they're going on behind closed doors and they're saving face publicly. But, you know, if Trump is as bad as we think he is, then why in the hell are we not having more people in the Democratic Party step up and say, this is what needs to get done? I know the argument's going to be, well, he's not going to listen. It's his, it's his delegates. He's the one with the money. It's the Biden Harris. They're the ones with the money right now. But damn, we need to get our shit together.
All right, taking a quick look at the New York Times right now. Representative Brad Schneider, Democrat of Illinois, earlier today called on Joe Biden to exit the race. He just said in an interview on CNN that Joe Biden has a strong handle of policy issues during that news conference, but he said the circumstances for the Democrats, meaning the situation writ large, is untenable. We can't have a situation where every day we are holding our breath, whether it's a press conference or a rally. Representative Scott Peters, Democrat of California, called on President Biden to withdraw from the race after the president's news conference. He says the Democrats are on a losing course. And a number of senior Democratic elected officials said it's imperative for the party to reach a resolution quickly. It appears that Biden and his fellow elected Democrats are growing further apart on what that resolution should be. Right, so concerns across the country among Americans regarding Joe Biden are real, they're grave, and they're growing concerns.
Figure this out. We're running out of time. It's July. We're going to have to be getting on. Well, I guess they're shooting off fireworks still here in Macomb. So, anyways,
Tyson, let me ask you, Tyson, you voted for Clinton 2016 and Biden 2020?
Yes.
Okay. So let me ask you the question Joe asked earlier. Who would your ideal ticket be of the people who could potentially be on a ticket?
Shapiro, Whitmer.
Yeah.
I've even entertained the idea of, Clinton was polling better. I know, and I told that to my wife, and she was, we're done with the Clintons. But I would say Shapiro, Whitmer, because I know this is Pennsylvania and Michigan, two swing states, and maybe that's wrong, but that'd be who I go with.
Yeah.
Now I do see the benefit in Harris. In 2020, she kind of got the raw deal. Well, her campaign sucked. That was number one. Number two, she was going in 2020 when justice, her being a prosecutor, wasn't very good for the background. It wasn't a personal story that she could really rely upon. And I do think I've seen her recently, but you'd have to have the campaign structure behind her. You can't pick your sister to run things and run them into the ground. But
Tyson, let me ask you this. Do you think Joe Biden has a good chance to win Michigan?
No.
Okay. Tyson, thank you. Brittany Prime.
Senator Stabenow tonight did tweet right after the debate that she actually, or not after the presser, that she felt that, tonight was what he needed to do to win Michigan. But, I got to just say about the, why people aren't speaking out more forcefully, because I think a lot of us are frustrated about that. But again, back to Joe's comments from this morning, they're earnestly difficult questions because nobody can answer them. We don't know if running somebody else winds up putting us in a better situation or a worse one. And I think that's a huge part of what everyone's struggling with in some very earnest ways.
Absolutely. You're right. Brittany Prime, tell everybody who you're for in this election.
I'm for the Democrat.
Yeah. Okay. Which
Whoever
one?
that is. Whoever that is.
But you're a Republican, but you're for the Democrat.
I'm a Republican against Trump. I'll say that. And kind of related to my question. So related to Biden stepping aside or not, I'm wondering how much of this is just a race that, can't be measured in the traditional sense. People are more polarized than they've ever been. So, I talked to Trump exhausted Republican women all day, and the fact that they are entertaining the idea of Kamala, I think says a lot. And I don't know. I just kind of wonder if the vibes speak louder than the polls this year.
Be more specific.
The polls aren't matching what I talk to every day. People I talk to every day.
So you think Trump is doing worse than the polls suggest?
No, I mean that if Biden steps aside, it's not a disaster in November, because you have Republican women who are willing to vote for Kamala, who after the debate will not vote for Biden.
Got it. Do you feel like if he does step aside, well, first of all, is your preference that he step aside?
Yes.
And do you feel that if he steps aside, the party should consolidate around Vice President Harris?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Efficiency, quick unity, money.
Yep.
And I think
According
she
to
should
my-
pick Shapiro.
Pick Shapiro. That's interesting. According to my reporting, there's some of the people who would likely be at the table devising a plan of whether there should be a big establishment endorsement. Aren't super keen on her chance of winning a general election. So, Brittany, tell me what gives you confidence that she could beat Trump?
Well, I think there's an underestimation of how much people just want somebody else that isn't an old white guy. Like, sorry, RFK, you don't count. Like, but just another breathing human that isn't 70 or over.
Brittany, we haven't talked about fundraising on this call, I don't think, and obviously that's a big concern for Joe Biden. Do you think there'd be enthusiasm for Vice President Harris in terms of fundraising, small and large dollars?
Well, there isn't fundraising for Biden right now, so I think it wouldn't be worse. I think it would give some enthusiasm, for sure.
Yeah.
People are not stepping up. It's hard right now. I'll say that.
Yeah. And what do you think Biden's...
Okay, great comment here in Politico. It was a moment unlike many in modern American political history. A sitting president defending his own mental and physical abilities while trying to stave off a mutiny from the party he has served for decades.
chances of beating Trump are at this point?
20%?
20%. That makes you an optimist.
No, I think he has a 20% chance of winning.
Yeah, that's more than most people I know who want him to win think at this point.
Well,
let me ask Lauren and Joe, and I don't know if either or both of you would feel comfortable answering this, but let me just ask you if you would. If Joe Biden decided he wanted to get out, what would you think that would look like? Do you think he'd give an Oval Office address? He'd do a rally? How do you think he would execute that?
Great question. Joe, what do you think?
Lauren.
Joe's like, Lauren, you answer. I'm like, Joe, you answer.
You know, I really don't know. I really don't know what that would look like. And that's what I'm you know, again, I'm hearing about people wanting to go talk to him to move him from the race, but there's such deep resentment for good reason, because the Democratic Party, he was treated terribly as vice president, by Obama staffers, and we've all heard the stories. Just absolutely horrific, and they're still kicking him every day they can, whether it's on CNN or whether it's in podcasts. And so he's not going to respond to that. And so I don't know what a graceful exit looks like. I think the biggest surprise, Lauren, for me is, and we've heard talk about Kamala here and how well she'd do. I think the biggest surprise for me is the number of high-level Democrats, top-tier Democrats who are talking about this, who when they talk about this are talking about an open convention and saying that if it looks like Joe Biden taps Kamala Harris, that doesn't help her. If she goes to the convention and wins there herself, that actually gives her.
Hey, come on. This is Mark Halperin talking with Joe Scarborough.
Into the fall election.
I mean, the whole
I
open
think
convention
that's
thing's
been the
such a
biggest
nightmare.
surprise. But I don't know how we get from here to there, to be really honest.
I'm not sure he does either. I mean, listen, the only example we have is LBJ and his his announcement. That's really the closest thing we have. And, you know, Americans certainly didn't see that coming. And that's the only example. I mean, I think on the Kamala stuff, and, you know, I could talk about her all day long. I really agree with Brittany, and I've been talking about this a lot with my, you know, people like Ali Vitale, Joe, and like, you know, Erin Haynes and all my fellow feminist colleagues in this space. And I think there's two things that I think are being underestimated about her, perhaps by the president himself, certainly by his team. One is we cannot know in advance the electrifying thrill that I think many young women and young people of color, and certainly Black women, the backbone of the Democratic Party, would feel if the president set the stage for Kamala to step into that role, however that happens, that he endorses her as the nominee, et cetera. I think we cannot measure what that could do in terms of energy, enthusiasm, et cetera. And I also think that there is a decent number of people out there who realized that they judged Hillary wrongly, that they made a mistake, that Trump was such a disaster. And I like to think that because Kamala is not entirely the first, maybe there's some way in which we move past some of the, sort of intractable bias that continues to hold women back, why we're one of, 59 other countries have had women heads of state and we haven't. So I happen to think there is a lot to be gained, both in terms of legacy and electricity and energy. And by the way, I also know how flawed she is. She's had a lot of problems with staff. She's not liked in Washington. There's a lot of problems there. But across the country, in a short, condensed campaign, where there's actually not that much time to smear her 9 ways till Sunday, she gets to come out looking pretty spectacular, and the infrastructure is there, which it wouldn't be for anyone else. And I think I cannot imagine anyone thinking the open convention is the right answer. That is just a nightmare of epic proportions.
But
my
Mark,
mind is worrying. Can I just say,
Joe,
Mark, though, you and I have both heard repeatedly from, and again, not people inside the Biden administration, because nobody inside the Biden administration is talking about this, at least to others, but people, top tier Democrats, Mark, have you not been hearing open convention? Again, this is something that 3-4 days ago we said was a fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And now, for the people that are talking about approaching Joe Biden that could actually make a difference, let's just say they're all on it's like the Clooney doctrine. Read George Clooney's op-ed, and Mika this morning said it wasn't written by George Clooney, that it was written by a former Democratic president. I don't believe that to be the case. However, President Obama did read it and gave the okay to it based on the reporting. And I will tell you, that is in line. What's in that op-ed is in line with everything I'm hearing from top tier Democrats who are even talking about going down this road. Nobody is saying Joe Biden should pass the baton to Kamala Harris. They're saying, well, like Clooney said, we should have an open convention. And if she wins there, that makes her stronger going into the fall.
Yeah. Let me make one point, and then I want to go to Jessica. My mind is worrying on two things. One is writing in my head the Biden withdrawal speech and what that would look like. But the other is a media plan for Kamala Harris if she's the nominee. And I'm thinking, what if her second stop, not her first stop, but her second stop was on Hannity? What's the way to introduce her to America in just a completely different way, reintroduce her, and to not fall into the trap of doing her, Maddow and then Lawrence O'Donnell for Variety? Like, what if she just went right at?
Right, this is Mark Halperin.
Something like that could look like. Let me unmute.
It'd be brilliant.
Jessica.
They'd never do it, but it's brilliant.
We'll see. Jessica, unmute, please.
Hi, sorry, I had to run into a room with some light. What I wanted to just say was I'm one of these kind of suburban Facebook moms or whatever. And
where do you live, Jessica? Where do you live, Jessica?
Sarasota, Florida.
Go ahead.
The hotbed of extremism. So anyway, I have a lot of, I actually voted for Trump in 2016, but not in 2020. And I have a lot of friends who are sort of not super politically engaged, but they've become politically engaged, particularly after Roe v. Wade was overturned. That to them was sort of the first indication that things are serious. This is something to be scared of. And, I have a lot of friends that are very liberal and some that are pretty conservative, a lot of people kind of in the middle. What I've noticed is ever since debate, which was devastating to those of us who are never Trump, we cannot let him win. I'm noticing this sort of energy shift for those of us, well, for everyone, really. It's becoming very hard to defend Biden to anyone. And so those of us who are just anyone who is not Trump, there's this sense of we almost feel like we can't attack Trump because there's not, you have no one else to sort of, I guess, put up against him. I mean, prior to the debate, it was well,
Jessica,
Biden, yeah.
I'm sorry. I just want to clarify one thing, and then I want you to go on. When you say you can't defend Biden, is it simply because of his performance in the debate and his mental acuity, or being dishonest, or what's hard to defend now?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think prior to the debate, it was like all of the stuff that the far right would want to show about Biden. It felt like these cherry-picked clips that made him look as bad as possible, and you could sort of explain them away. And it was like, oh, that's just stuff that Tucker Carlson's sharing. That's not real. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh my God, it is real. We look like it's all this outrage about Hunter Biden. It's like, who cares? He's not really in the White House. Oh, he's going to these meetings. Oh shit. Well, maybe like we don't feel like we can defend our candidate. And I honestly feel like anyone else could beat Trump, because literally anyone else would be in some way defensible. There's time to prop them up and get them, ready for a national stage. I know Kamala's not super popular, but everyone I know is sort of like, they have their preferences. Like someone will say, I really love Gretchen Whitmer, or so whoever. Most people don't know who any of those people are, and they don't care. They just want anyone to run against Trump who they wouldn't be embarrassed defending. You know what I mean?
Jessica, thank you for all that. If you could make any of the following three people president, you get to pick their president. Would you pick Trump, Biden, or Harris?
Harris.
And what about if you end
Absolutely.
up having to choose between Trump and Biden?
Well, I'll definitely vote for Biden, but I don't think he'll win. I don't think it's possible.
Not possible. You think his chance of winning are 0%?
I mean, pretty much. Yeah. Everyone I know who was sort of on the fence after the debate, it was just a joke. And my boss, who I was shocked, he said, I don't think I'm going to vote. And he's pretty, like, I wouldn't expect that from him, but he's just so disgusted. And he actually thinks that I guess what it is there's a lot of people that aren't as scared of Trump as I think they should be. Those people who are not sufficiently terrified of a second Trump term who think, well, I'm just not going to vote. It's, those of us who are truly terrified are like, well, whoever is propping up Weekend at Biden's, they can be the president. We don't care. We realize he doesn't have a clue, but we're going to vote for his administration. But the people who don't have that same fear and panic are just like, what does it matter? I mean, this is all a complete sham,
Yeah. Joe or Lauren, either of you have a question for Jessica?
Yeah, I'm curious, Jessica. What moved you from Trump to Biden from 16 to 20?
Okay, that'll do it for now. Take care.